The mantra for being in the product business, real estate is location, location, location. Product is prioritization, prioritization, prioritization. And priorities change daily, and that's okay. You need to have a strong, flexible DNA to be in the product business because things will change and stakeholders will have varying opinions. But you're going to have the discipline to really have those good, healthy debates with all stakeholders at the table to prioritize what's most important to the business.
Welcome to the Founders Journey podcast. Inspiration, education for founders by founders. Welcome back, Founders Journey podcast. If you've ever had one of those moments in your life where you make a decision and then you think, why in the hell did I just make that decision? When the moment comes around, this is exactly that moment for me. So welcoming, welcome back, Peter. Good to see you. And
I try not to laugh too much.
And actually, the reason I'm saying that is because I think I've just made myself vulnerable to the two guys I'm probably closest with in the world outside my family here. So welcoming Ira Grossman to the podcast today. And Ira is my business partner at Evergreen Mountain Equity Partners. Ira and I have been business partners for on and off, probably almost coming up on, well, way too long, probably coming up on 25 years at this point. So it's been a long time. He's also probably one of the top experts out there in terms of product roadmap, building product inside software companies. So we're going to be talking about that today, but undoubtedly this is going to devolve into mayhem. So just warning in advance, because Peter and Ira are probably the two guys who know every sordid story, dumb thing I've ever done in my entire life. So anyway, welcome, Ira, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, James.
I'll add one thing about Ira. So when you work with any of their portfolio companies, and sorry to really reveal this, if you want like fiscal responsibility and someone's going to be like, we can or cannot do that, I call Ira. That's who I call, because he's like, yeah, we could get this done. Greg's like, yeah, do it all. Let's go. He's like me. And then Ira's like, yeah, we can't do that. That's not going to happen.
Ira's definitely the more responsible.
He's like the yin and yang of, it's like a perfect
try to be the adult in the room.
Exactly.
No, thanks, guys. This is incredibly incestuous and fun to be on. I will say seriously though, congrats to you guys. I know creating a podcast, there's so many out there. It's so hard to break through the noise and provide some good value, and trying to be reasonably objective here. I think you guys have done a really good job over the last year of really taking this to the next level. You probably like go in the whole other direction now, bringing me on, and it's going to devolve from a level of professionalism you've had previously. But seriously, congrats. It's really cool that you guys are doing this and put the time and energy into putting this content out there for founders.
Yeah, but appreciate that.
Just to know, I know Greg did the intro, but like, Greg, why don't you give the intro, or Ira, you can tell us about your background a little bit, because highly qualified to be here, to be honest with you. So,
yeah, I mean, the short version is serial entrepreneur, built 3 tech platforms in my career. Each of them were sort of 5 to 10 plus year runs. The common thread were they were all SaaS. One was in the software modeling business. One was in the pre-employment assessment space, where Greg and I spent a long time working together. And one was in the life sciences space, which was kind of a left turn from a vertical perspective, but again, it was a SaaS solution, and a great opportunity to learn. I've been a bit of an accidental entrepreneur. All 3 of those were all 3 businesses that were about 6 months. So had a founder, they were about 6 months in, they were living in the sort of proverbial garage mode when I got involved through, various paths. My passion is really understanding how businesses operate and how do they scale. And I've always had partners like Greg who are a little bit more of the visionary rainmakers. And that's just been a great combination for me. I've been really lucky to have that journey. And then for context of today, a lot of what I've learned about myself over the years is of all the different mechanics of a business and how they operate. I like a bunch of the pieces of it. The one I really have passion and enjoy is the product component, and how do you bring a piece of software to life, which is a challenging journey, as everybody who's ever tried it knows.
I was just going to say, so the product roadmap and creation, I know I've used you as a resource for my own businesses that I've been a part of. Why don't you talk about your experience on product roadmap creation and, how you got into that and why that's important to you?
Yeah, I mean, the roadmap is sort of the manifestation of the product strategy. And the product strategy, what I gleaned after years of getting punched in the face and trying to figure out, how to build a software business to scale, is that the alignment of the product team, the client team, sales team, the engineering team, I mean, really all the folks who are executing within the business, the alignment of those folks, especially in a software company, just ties back again and again to what are we building? How fast can we build it? What can we deliver? What do the clients care about? Where are the pain points? How do we solve those pain points, et cetera? So to me, that's it's a really cool challenge. What I love about software is that you create something from nothing. A software startup, most of the time, you're trying to build a better mousetrap, or you're trying to really disturb or disrupt a new market. But you're creating essentially something from nothing with software, which is really cool and really daunting. So having a clear product strategy to wrap around that, we can get into sort of all the vectors that come off of that, but it really impacts everyone in the business. And without it, I think you lose credibility really quickly if you can't articulate. Especially again in a software SaaS business, if you can't articulate where your product is, where it's going, where it's headed, why, where the risks are, et cetera, et cetera. If you can't articulate that, you're just going to have a lot of challenges. So that's why, and for me, again, it was sort of like accidental entrepreneur, bit of an accidental product leader, just being, miserly and cautious in software startup mode. And there was no thought of we're going to hire a product leader. No, somebody on the leadership team or several of us on the leadership team are just going to figure this out. We love what we're doing. We're passionate about the product. Let's just figure out what we have to do next. And I just gravitated towards that and ended up taking on that role in multiple companies over the years. And quite frankly, in the early days, some of the concepts that exist today didn't even exist. Like there's no such concept as a product owner. It just didn't exist. Even a product manager was a vague idea in the first business I started. Now it's predominant, and there's a whole framework upon which people can work, and I'm a big advocate for that. But this is just we need to survive. Let's figure out what our product strategy is. So it was very organic for me to end up there as the answer.
Starting at the high level. So you and I over the summer, we did reason this whole podcast came about is over the summer, we did a summer camp for our portfolio CEOs and leaders up here in Evergreen, Colorado. And Ira gave a presentation that we sort of jokingly referred to as making a product roadmap sexy again, which will definitely be titling this podcast, by the way. But kind of taking it from really high level, Ira, like really, why does this whole concept, if you're a high growth, early stage founder starting to hit scale, why does this matter, right? Like, why does this whole concept of getting really serious about your product roadmap really matter?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Obviously, it depends on where you are in the journey, but it always matters. The degree to which pressure will be applied to you in the context of product is going to change and likely increase over time. But it matters again because it is the manifestation of what you're creating in a software business. So you have to be able to answer the questions, and the questions are going to come fast and furious. Even before you have a board, even before you have investors who might be hitting you hard with questions, your team is going to want to know, what are we building and why? And not just the software engineering team, sales team. If that's you and one other person, they want to know, what can we sell? The marketing organization wants to know, what are we building so I can promote that? The client team, if you have it, again, could be one person early on, but what is the product I need to become an expert in? So everybody in the organization needs to understand where we are and where we're going. It is the defining map of where the business is moving, outside of the financial models, which are always a defining map, and you can't get away from it. It's even less sexy than the product piece, but the product piece is the defining map of where the business is headed. And as a founder, whether you're, many software CEOs are technical founders, so they're deep in the weeds of this and they're passionate about it, even though they may not be the best person to create the product roadmap because they might get too technical. But even if you're not a technical founder, you need to really have good clarity. And again, it's not a precise science. It's going to have a lot of variability over time, but taking a quarter and a quarter approach to this and understanding where you're headed, what you're building and why, and then the different components of a roadmap. So what is new build? What's enhancement build? How much time and effort do we spend on fixing bugs? How much energy do we spend just on focused on what our initial clients are saying versus what our vision is saying? So all of those are reasons why, if you don't have context and a framework like a roadmap to work from, it gets really messy really quickly.
So what's a great product roadmap contain usually?
There's a lot, and I'm a visual learner. I really think making these things visual is really important. There's a thought leader out there. He's been out there forever, named Edward Tufte, who is sort of my hero in the visualization of data and design. And Tufte was all about, how do you create individual visualizations? I know it's an old reference, but we all have gray hair on this podcast today.
I was just going to make fun of you for having a hero in data visualization and design.
I do. It's super geeky. I'm actually, his books are on the shelf behind me. But he really was able to show how elegant visualizations can take mountains of data and really expose them in an efficient way. And he's got really interesting examples, the Napoleonic Wars, and where that was going to fall apart. If you looked at the visualizations and the changes in temperature, like, you could see where he was going to get into trouble and his army's going to get into trouble. The Space Shuttle Challenger and the fact that the O-rings were the cause for that terrible disaster. His visualizations were able to show that in a way that nobody had ever found before. So that's the sort of theoretical concept here. So tying that into a roadmap, which compared to those examples seems much less complex. There's still a lot of information. So the ideal ingredients, I would say, minimally, you need time. So time-based. I like quarters. So 4 quarters, 4 rolling quarters. What is the probability of delivery within each of those quarters? The current quarter we're in, I'm hoping to see high probability. By the time we get 3-4 quarters out, everybody should understand that things are going to change in the software business. So those are probably 25-30% probability when they're 4 quarters out. So probability of delivering successfully. What are the elements that are on the roadmap? Again, what are we building that's new, enhancement, sustain, bug fix, integration? There's many categories. And then there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of how much should you have in each of those buckets, but understanding what those categories are, and then some relative size and complexity, so that all stakeholders can get a sense that, yeah, we're only working on 2 modules this quarter, but they're both relatively high complexity and they eat up a lot of resources. So those are some of the building blocks.
So just to follow up on that, so you kind of alluded to this. When people build these, I'm sure you've been through this before, and I've kind of seen you do this. They have all these things, and they may have like 5 modules in there that are really complex. Like, we want to do all of this. Like, how often do you see that, and how do you monitor that? Like,
so it's it's interesting. I always say the mantra for being in the product business is like real estate is location, location, location. Product is prioritization, 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 and priorities change daily, and that's okay. You need to have a strong, flexible DNA to be in the product business because things will change and stakeholders will have varying opinions. Um, but you're going to have the discipline to really have those good, healthy debates with all stakeholders at the table to prioritize what's most important to the business because it's never one thing. In some ways, it's really
Yeah.
easier in the early stages. Is like we just need to get a minimal product out there. I like minimal lovable product versus minimal viable,
Yeah.
but some minimal product that we need to get out the door to in a lot of ways, that's the easy time, right? Because we just know we need these three features. We've got to get these three features to market. Everything else is noise. But very
Yeah.
quickly, it's a very nonlinear curve. Very quickly, there's a lot of competing priorities at the table. So you've got to just be really transparent about that. You can get more sophisticated with it over time as well. You could actually start to quantify what's most important to the business
Mhm.
and start to put some quantification around your prioritization. So it's got some scales and some measurement around it, but start with just getting the right people at the table and debating it in advance versus debating it after you've started down the roadmap path.
Yeah.
How do you? I've heard you talk about this a bunch of times, right? And it's always interesting to me, and I think having gone through this a bunch of times as well. How do you tell a founder how to prioritize, right? Like, how do you make those decisions around prioritization in a way that will have a positive impact on this? Because I think it's really easy, and I know I've lived this, right? It's really easy to get really confused on like that prioritization can change on a daily basis, and there's this like balance that you've got to reach, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
tell a founder to prioritize or a product leader to prioritize?
It is hard. You're right. What I like to do is just start with getting the stakeholders in the room. Again, it might be 3 people early on, it might be 12 people later on, but who's responsible for sales, for client, for engineering, for marketing, et cetera. Get those folks in the room and sort of ignore the roadmap for a moment and just talk about we know what the values of the business are. Hopefully, there's a semblance of what our values and what our mission is. If there isn't, that's probably the exercise you need to do first. But let's assume that exists. Have a really frank conversation about what when you guys think about our gals, when you think about our product, what's most important to you? And people are going to raise their hand and say, "Oh, most important thing is speed. Most important thing is creating raving fans. The most important thing is that it's engineering. It's got engineering excellence. The most important thing is that it's high quality." So get that all out there because everybody needs to have that voice. And the reality is they're all the right answers. Then bring in the context of, okay, who are we? What do we care about? And then how do these priorities align with who we are and what we care about? So it's a really thoughtful exercise. It's useful if you have somebody who can lead you along the way. But I think I've seen it happen numerous times in having led these sessions that there's a real eye opener for the founders that there's many variables at play. What they may be really passionate about. Look, we just have to get to market. We've got to define product market fit. I've got pressures from my investors. I have to generate revenue. Nothing else matters. But then they're hearing some other voices. They're hearing some other context and really realizing why this is an important prioritization exercise. And it might be that the founder's priority takes hold, and that is the precedent for 2 or 3, 4 quarters or a year at a time. But there will be a point where it's going to start to shift and the priorities are going to start to change and become more strategic as a business versus just getting that initial product market fit and some initial revenue in the door, which is all anybody's going to care about appropriately early on. So I think the net and all that is get all the stakeholders in the room again, whether it's 3 people or 30 people, have a really frank conversation about what's important to everybody when it comes to the product, and then try to really um, quantify and prioritize what that means to the business, and boil it, and at the end of the day say, look, if we only have 3 things we can work on, what's your top 3? And that sort of starts to pivot it from a conceptual conversation into a more technical conversation about the actual product and solution. It's fun and it's healthy if it's done, in the right context.
And so this is something, obviously, after you get a couple customers, sometimes you get a big customer. I know I've been in conversations or heard you talk about this before. You get a big customer and then they start driving the product roadmap. How do you deal with that? Because you still have to sell this to other people. Like, you can have a scenario where a company gets kind of in trouble because it's built for one company. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Peter. And it's a real conundrum, especially early on. So the earlier on you are in the business, the more likely that you're going to let that drive your roadmap. And that might
Mhm.
be okay really early on. The more you progress in your journey, the more dangerous that is going to become.
Mhm.
So what I have found to be successful is to start to think about the concept of a client council. And it might be 3 clients early on, it might be 30 clients later on, but key stakeholders from the client side, and I've seen this dynamic happen, which is really cool, is that you get a client, they come in, they say, this is the most important thing for us. We have to have this. And uh, whoever's listening to that, whether it's the founder, whether it's somebody running client, they're trying to listen intently. They're trying to really make the client happy. Uh, I've seen that same idea come from the client in a room full of other client stakeholders, and the conversation changes to, oh, you know, we didn't really think that was as important as these 2 other things. And
Right.
they start to get into an interaction and a debate around what's really important. And
Mhm.
that's been a really powerful tool in my experience to try and really suss out what's important to the larger group. So that's one technique that I've seen successful. Another is to put some economics behind it. Say, look, we love you, client A, and we're going to do everything we can to satisfy you. And 30% of what you're asking for, everybody in our client base needs. So we're going to build that. Here's our roadmap. Here's where you fit in that roadmap. Oh, by the way, here's another reason why the roadmap's so important. 70% of what you're asking for is a total one-off that only you care about, and we understand that, and you're important. Um, here's what it will cost for us to do that. If you want to partner with us on that, we'll build it into our roadmap. And very quickly, you find out how serious they are. Sometimes they come back and they're willing to spend, and it's still as important. Many times it's, oh, yeah, we're okay with the 30%. We can wait on the 70% piece. That's a one-off. It's not as important as we thought. So those are
So
2 different techniques. Yeah.
that susses out people saying, I want all this stuff. And then that'd be
Right.
nice. The nice to have turns into
Right.
really the need to have, and it
Right.
helps
Right.
level instead of you reacting to kind of what they
Right.
say.
It's also, so the proactive answer to it is get an external facing version of your roadmap, which may be a variant of your internal facing, but get that external
Mhm.
facing version of the roadmap proactively in front of your clients, so they actually
Mhm.
know what you're working on and know that there's some interesting things coming, and know that if they ask for something, it potentially changes that trajectory for everyone. So that also starts to change the relationship and change the expectation from the client. But it's a great problem. I mean, you want to have those conversations. You just don't want to become subject to answering to one client's requests and building that client's product versus building your vision.
Mhm.
There's two things there you just said that are both just incredibly powerful takeaways. I think for for founders who are starting to hit that kind of growth trajectory, right? Where an MVP you're building just that, right? It's there's probably not a lot of feedback that you're really getting at that point outside of what you're soliciting from customers. But as you start to actually get those customers, one of the areas of pushback that I've heard recently, Ira, and not this isn't pushback to to you, but this is that debate I was having with somebody, right? Which is, well, we're too early. We can't do a client advisory council. We can't do the client meetings because they're not going to give us information. You can't get competitors in the room. And quite honestly, I've had the same exact experience as you multiple times, right? Where it's really this amazing thing that happens when you get people kind of in the room, literally or figuratively. Those priorities that somebody is pounding the table on saying, you have to deliver this, you've got to deliver, we're going to cancel our contract. Suddenly those things melt away when you're in a more kind of rational, balanced environment like that, right? Where people are actually weighing in. And oftentimes, what we find is what I've found is that companies become so myopic in the way that they're thinking about it. They're not even thinking about what's actually possible outside of their little world. I need you to replicate this functionality for me, right? But you get them in a room, it's like, holy crap, I never actually thought about that before. Now all of a sudden those priorities start to, that pounding the table priority or demand starts to really melt away. I think it's just an incredibly important thing that you can do. Look, if you got a couple customers, you can do this, right? This isn't something you have to wait until you've got 200 customers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You can do a 20-minute Zoom meeting with 3 customers, and it's about building the muscle. That's what both the portfolio founders we talk to at Evergreen and, those I work with on other boards. It's all about just building the muscle early on in all of these areas, and getting some practice at it. And it yields great results. So start small, build the muscle, find out what works for you, but getting the voice of the client in a way other than them coming to you reactively, just yields great results.
Yep. Are there frameworks that you would point people to, or that you're particularly, like I know there's a lot of frameworks around building roadmaps and things like that, but are there frameworks that you're particularly, a fan of, or that you would point people to?
I'm not, to be honest. There's tons out there. Again, this is not rocket science, just in terms of the sort of the manifestation of it into a roadmap. Any product owner worth their salt in the agile world today is going to understand all of those sort of elements that need to be on the roadmap. I think the more potent piece is getting into a mindset of product prioritization, that all stakeholders need to be at the table on a quarterly basis to have a really healthy debate about what's important to the business and why, and how it aligns back to the values of the business. To me, that's an amalgamation of lots of people who've written on this and my experiences over the years. But to me, that's sort of more important than the sort of tactical framework that you can apply to this, because there's just a ton out there on that. I will say, though, thinking about getting that right product owner in place, and if you decide it's one of the co-founders, fantastic. If you decide you want to hire somebody for that, I just think it's hard not to have that. It's almost as hard as not having a sort of a technical leader. If you're building a software product and you don't have a CTO equivalent when you're in startup mode, it's really hard. Very quickly, it's pretty hard if you don't have somebody with that product mindset.
That's a good lead in. So I know you've helped hire, or at least get people in place for that product leader. What, like, as a high growth startup, and you're thinking of hiring someone like that, what kind of would you be looking for in a person like that?
Yeah, my thought is, you don't have to go out and hire a chief product officer. It probably doesn't make any sense, both strategically or fiscally, to do that. But a good product owner, somebody who understands the mechanics of your agile development, somebody who can be a true partner to the software engineering team and act as a bridge between leadership, sales, marketing, everybody who's passionate about product deliverable, and the engineering team. Somebody who can be flexible enough to bridge those two worlds, and have great organizational skills, is just a really big asset. So flexibility, organization skills, some good vision, makes a difference. If they have design capabilities, fantastic, but you can get that from a third party. I'm a great example. Like I can look at a product design and tell you pretty quickly what I feel about the UX. With generally had pretty good results there, but I can't draw a stick figure. So, so I don't have the inherent design capability, but I have a sense of what's useful for a user, what is easy, what's efficient, and design as a differentiator is a really cool tool also for founders to think about. You can come into a space that might be, assuming you're not creating something brand new, you're not, but you're more likely disrupting or improving a market. You can really use your design to differentiate because there's so many. Unfortunately, there's a lot of poor designs out there. There's a lot of inefficient design. When I was in life sciences, I was like, that was a new vertical for me when I started that business, and I was blown away that 95% of what was out there all looked like a medical form. No matter what they were addressing in the industry, they made everything look like a medical form. It was horrible. So we built a business that was so the other end of the spectrum that people's head would just explode. Like, you could do it this way, you can think differently. So I really think design as a differentiator is something that founders should really grab onto when they think about their product strategy. And it doesn't have to be earth-changing Apple level design strategy, but it can be just sort of nuanced ways that, again, it's more efficient for your users to operate and maybe more fun. And it's something in a lot of different sectors people don't think about. Can you make the software fun in some way?
Yeah.
What is the right time, do you think, where you do recommend a company start to really think about that? VP level, C level product leader. Like, how do you judge when the right time comes where you may be starting to outgrow, say, the founder's capability or something along in that area?
Yeah, it's a hard call. I don't think there's a hard threshold, but general sense is, if you can get your minimal lovable product out the door without that investment, because one of the founders has enough passion to drive it, or you might get a little bit of third party help. That's fantastic. I think once you get past that, you've got some product market fit. Maybe you've got a little bit of real ARR on the table. I think, again, you don't have to think about hiring a chief product at that point, but bringing in a really good product owner / product manager who could start to lead the charge for you probably makes sense at that point. I think and that person may or may not grow into the true leader. And if they don't, I think once you're, in the SaaS world, you're starting to look at a small Series A, you're in the $1 million+ of ARR. That's probably the point where you want to have somebody who's a little bit more in a leadership role. But I think you can get pretty far along to that point, as long as you have some of those core concepts in place and you're not just completely winging it. Because there is just like tech debt in your software code, you're gonna have a lot of tech debt in your product strategy if you don't have anybody thinking about this early on.
Yeah. It's especially, you see this, you talked about design, right? You see this in design too all the time, where you start to build these kind of Frankenstein looking systems, right? Over time, and suddenly you're going back and you're trying to redo the stuff. It just gets incredibly expensive and incredibly hard to deal with as the complexity of the system starts to grow. It just, dealt with that so many times where you say like, hey, can't we just reskin this thing, or can't we make it look better? And, eventually over time, the answer becomes no, you can't, right? There's just too much.
Is that some of that inevitable though? You have like your minimum viable product, you sell it, and then you start selling it, and then you have to go, okay, what do I do? I know I'm not the expert here, but they have to look at how do we engineer this, and we have to kind of rebuild that so it scales. And then the design piece too, you have to say, hey, where is this going? That's that roadmap maybe could help. To say like, we can't get stuck in this like bad place that happens to. Does that happen to everyone? I mean, I don't know when someone that I haven't heard that conversation go on for, but
yeah, I mean, it's an organic process, right? So both your engineering design and your UX and UI design are going to evolve over time. However, I think there's lots of examples that still exist out there today. Today, you can avoid a little bit more because of design frameworks to build front end software are just a lot easier and more powerful. But there's still a lot of examples, to Greg's point, out there of that, like, nobody just worried about the front end. They just wanted to functionally work, and nobody thought about the user experience until it was too late. And then it's really hard to just completely reskin it at that point. So it's just something that's worth modest investment upfront to really think about user experience. And again, the other extreme I've seen as well, which is like all you care about is UX and UI, and you don't have any functional utility. So you've got to have some balance.
Overspend too, right? Like we have to build this awesome thing, and they're so focused on that. And you're like, wait, we need a customer. Like we need a couple of those.
It ends up being like the showers in a lot of the hotels I stay in, right? Like you're like, wow, that is a work of art, but I can't get the water to run. Like I have no idea how to turn the freaking shower on. Right? I mean, that's that. Right. There's got to be
a hidden tile. It's like the hidden tile.
Right. Or trying to turn off your iPhone, right? Like, I don't know. My iPhone's been out for 12 years. I don't know really what to do, right? But I think, though, more to the point, I think you see that less, right? Where it's really so design heavy. But you certainly see these examples. Ira, you and I have lived this too many times, I think, to mention to save the reputation of people. But you have systems that are built by engineers that are, and not to beat up on the engineers, they're bulletproof systems, right? I mean, these things can withstand anything, but they're horrible, right? And that's the thing it's so easy to just invest a little bit now. I mean, when you and I were starting our first companies, like, Upwork and things like the Fiverr and things like that didn't exist, right? It was really hard to pull in a freelancer, just say, give me 10 hours of work around, making this UX like usable, right? And kind of friendly, right? All right, soften it up. And now I think those resources are available everywhere in the world for you, right? And you can just start to invest a little bit of money to really, like you said, differentiate yourself, just simply by the fact that the software doesn't suck to look at.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I really like founding teams, because I think when you have a visionary founder and a technical founder, and they can work together and have that conversation and balance out the degree of technical complexity versus user experience and design. Yeah. That's really healthy. And it works in other ways. So when you have a really technical founder, though, you more often than not can end up down that rabbit hole where there's like all this technical, what they perceive as really sexy, cool functionality,
high function,
that 80% of the clients don't care about and can't use because it's so complex. So that's a trap that highly technical solo founders fall in, which is, again, why I love the sort of, founder teams where you can have a more balanced view.
So wrapping this up, and everyone's been very well behaved, I do have to say.
I was going to say, this is when we're allowed to officially devolve into abuse.
No. Before it evolves. Then if you were to just give kind of 3 pieces of advice, right, to a high growth founder, they're starting to deal with some of the issues around this stuff. They've got the MVP market. Now they're getting customer feedback. Like, what are the 3 pieces of advice that they should be thinking about right now?
Number 1, take a real hard look in the mirror and determine if you or any of your co-founders have that skill set to be the sort of de facto product leader for as long as needed. And if the answer is yes, fantastic. Run that clock as long as you can. I was in that mode for years in, 2 out of 3 businesses, and I enjoyed it. And we got great leverage out of not having to pay a head of product to do that. But the answer is no, then really think about at least getting that first person in place. So have somebody who's passionate about it and can really focus on product as soon as you can realistically afford it. Number one. Number two, do that transparent exercise where you bring the stakeholders to the table and have a healthy debate about what's important to everybody and how that fits into your core values as a company, so that you can really go back to that North Star. When you're getting 15 client requests and 10 requests from sales and marketing for changes, you want to be able to go back to that conversation and say, okay, why are we doing this? Does it align with our North Star? Should we be doing it? Should we be doing it this quarter, next quarter, or next year, or not at all? So get yourself in a place where you have that framework. And then 3 is just know that it's going to be absolute chaos and that you're going to have to reprioritize, sometimes on a daily basis, but more often than not on a weekly or monthly basis. And that's okay. That's what's cool and exciting about building software, in my opinion, is that you can pivot, you can make changes. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make the wrong calls, but you can course correct as long as you maintain this sort of open, transparent, and vigorous approach to this whole thing.
I think it's a great way to wrap it up. Obviously, I know what you're working on today, but normally when we're wrapping these things up, we're what are you working on? What are the kind of the things that you're dealing with today? How does somebody who maybe wants more advice or to get in contact with you, reach out to you?
Yeah, my whole gig at this point in my career, and I had this epiphany with our mutual friend Jeff Evans, who you've had on the podcast. Is I'm at the point in my career I want to be an entrepreneurial Sherpa, and I want to really help founders get on that rope line and find their way through this complex founder's journey, which you guys are talking about all the time on the podcast. So that's what I love doing. Evergreen is the vehicle to do that. Evergreen Mountain Equity Partners is Greg and I's baby, where we get to do this on a semi-professional basis and use some of our operational experience to help others. So that's where my passion is. That's where I spend my time, as well as individual and personal investing in startups as well that don't fit the Evergreen model. So people can email me, ira@emap.io. So my parents knew I wasn't too sharp, so I only have a 3-letter name, IRA. It's pretty easy. ira@emep.io.
Okay, here's the inside baseball. If you want to get funded, you have to talk to Ira. You can talk to Greg, but you definitely have to talk to Ira.
Well, wait.
If you want love, talk to Greg. Feel love.
Yeah. You have to convince Ira, and then maybe you'll get a deal.
Ira's favorite saying to me is, "You fall in love with everybody." Like
that's the rule. So everyone's pitching Greg. That's great, but you got to pitch Ira too.
What I'll say, Ira's definitely the more rational one out of our partnership of 2. I'm definitely the slightly more eccentric, off the wall one out of the 2. So it is a good yin and yang. But if you want actual real answers that aren't either going to get you injured or put out of business, talk to Ira. If you want to have a pile of fun, I'm your man.
Yeah, he's your man.
Yeah.
Well, this was awesome. I promised you it wouldn't be too painful. We were. I didn't call anybody old. Although for the record, I am the youngest on this call. No insults at all. No stories, no terrible stories that we threatened you with were told. So
you didn't ask question 5.
We're going to do a whole other podcast on question 5 and other various inappropriate things that have happened in our journeys.
And if you'd like to know what question 5 is, you should send an email to Ira or Greg, or reach out to them on LinkedIn, and you could maybe they'll tell you.
That's right. That's for subscribers only. If you're subscribed to this podcast today, we'll tell you a question.
Even though you can't subscribe.
So no, we'll get you back. Somebody we were doing a recording yesterday, on with two guys, and they were talking about, it was all about like co-founder relationships and stuff. And during this, somebody actually suggested that Peter and I, Tim Ferriss does these podcasts where it's like him and
Yep.
Kevin Rose, and they basically just get drunker and drunker as it goes through. So I actually think we should do that with the three of us one time. And
I think it's a great idea. I think we should add in hot wings or something like that.
Yeah.
somebody ends up in prison. This was great. Thanks for coming on, Ira. We promised you it wouldn't be too painful. It wasn't. So
No, thanks, gents. This was fun. Hope I could share something that was useful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great takeaways, I think, for any founder. It's just stuff that's super important. So see you next time on the Founders Journey podcast.